Dalton George held his second ever town hall meeting here at Lily Snack Bar across from App State, where he talked to residents here about parking, environmentalism, and housing in a more casual setting.
The reason I'm on town council is I was doing a lot of renter organizing as a student and as a renter. We were staging rent strikes. We were going to bat for people that were about to be evicted. Didn't matter if you were a student or not. Whoever you were, we were really trying to look out for you. And some of those renters pushed me to run, and that was kind of the organizing thing. When I first got elected, I was like, man, I was doing a lot more for renters when I was an activist and willing to take these fights than I could as an elected official. I think a lot of that was because I had to understand how these institutions work and navigate them. I mean, local government's difficult. I'm a regular person. I come from a working class background. Boone is already developed. We're full of impervious surfaces. It seems like if we build dense housing anywhere, it should be in the 6 square miles here, so the wilderness outside of Boone isn't impacted by terrible sprawl, right? I think that's part of the answer, is that if Boone recognizes our role in providing homes for folks, right, and that we are the population center, it prevents agricultural land, green space, rivers from being damaged further, so on. So I think it's part of it. I think beyond that too, though, is if we already have impervious surface somewhere, redeveloping that for denser housing where it makes sense is the way to do it, because at that point you're not adding any sort of roof space, you're not adding any sort of paved parking lot, but you're adding housing stock. And there's a lot of housing stock in this area that the landlords have just coasted for the longest time on it. App South is a great example. I actually don't know who administers that. I might get in trouble if I just take these people into account. And it's right by the university. And so when you think about a place for denser housing where people can walk to class, do whatever the case is, like that makes sense. And you're not developing anymore. You're not creating an environment any further than you were. And so I think that's part of it. Area near the hospital is the same way. I lived in a unit over by the hospital and it flooded regularly and actually was totally destroyed, not during Helene, but just in kind of its own deferred maintenance situation. We lost everything. And so it's like a weird duplex in the middle of a lot that probably shouldn't exist. It's like we could house hundreds of people on this lot, but it's just this funky duplex that has no historical value, cultural value, is falling apart. I think that's part of the answer, redevelopment as well. The reason that you're seeing parking decks that are this small, and like when I'm thinking of parking deck, I'm thinking of the downtown parking deck versus a university parking deck, it's just because of cost. It's that the county, even with the amount of money they have over the town of Boone, $15-20 million difference operating budget, maybe even more, they can't even afford to go up 3 stories on a parking deck. It's just not feasible, right, at that time for a smaller jurisdiction. And I think that, so it's not really a height limit getting in the way of that as much as just like willingness. The town bought that property in part to preserve that community because that was a huge chunk of land. It was actually affordable, it's like $400,000, which for outside developers or whatever the case is, and we had real issues with the idea of Junaluska becoming gentrified, right? I mean, it's already under such pressures, and so we bought that property with the idea of maybe long-term developing some of it into like public employee housing, whatever the case is. We obviously don't have the money right now, so the kind of natural in-between is employee daycare for public employees, and that's going to help folks. I think it's like a working class issue, right? Is how can we help single parents, working parents be successful? So that will be coming soon in partnership with the university. Questions about potential attacks on FEMA, ongoing attacks on FEMA, and how the town can step in and help people locally when the federal government's failing. And our local institutions were pushed to the max during FEMA. I mean, we went all out, but staff that were integral in getting systems back online were trapped in their homes out in the county. And so me and another council member were pulling 12-hour shifts just to be able to make sure we had enough boots on the ground as staff, right? I was not an elected official, I was staff. I was going out checking on folks. And Nate here, actually, I was there volunteering with him the first day, and then I totally embedded with the town. I went from citizen to staff. And I saw firsthand, I mean, we had folks that were sleeping in their cars and lots, waking up and pulling 16, 17-hour shifts. We had 20 swift water rescues in the town of Boone, none of which resulted in a fatality, which is kind of unheard of, right? So these folks were pushed to the max, and then now we're in the marathon mode. How do we get people housed? How do we do all of that? I think the reality is the federal government, I have the strong belief the federal government has a role in disaster response. I think the idea that they don't is really dumb, I mean, for lack of a better word. And we need to have that conversation. I think one of the most disappointing things about the moves to attack FEMA federally is it felt like people became more anti-FEMA than they were about actually solving disaster response, right? And FEMA was not perfect, absolutely not. People were still hurting, people were denied, but instead of saying, how can we improve that, make sure that nobody's left out to fend for themselves in a disaster, we said, let's just throw the baby out with the bathwater, which to me is like not being an adult in the room when it comes to government. The town, I think, can continue to partner with nonprofits who stepped up, hospitals, things like that, Hunger and Health Coalition. We already fund some of those programs. We need to keep doing that, build those relationships better. So I think that's the best thing that could have happened for this community. I'm very excited about Chancellor Norris, and I have a lot of optimism about improving that relationship. I really want to lean into the fact that we like each other right now. It's kind of on the nose. But I do want to dedicate it to the public employees that worked during the hurricane. I think that is important. And I think it's a positive story there because we were, both county and town employees rose to the occasion. That item is on the agenda for this upcoming meeting, which is March 12th. And I have no doubt that it'll be approved. I don't see why it wouldn't be. And once it's approved, we can go ahead and start aggressively looking for funding, grant funding, partnerships with the county. And then we'll be out there building trails. There's always opportunities to volunteer with the Town of Boone's Sustainability Board, which I serve on. We do tree plantings, invasive removals, trail building, things like that. And so I'm sure we'll get some volunteers. We've actually already done some tree plantings in that specific area. So very cool. I think we could throw our weight behind. This question was about Watauga County is currently testing out new voting machines and what the town of Boone is doing, if we can do anything related to that. And the answer is that the Board of Elections is funded by the county, so we're not super involved in that process. But the town can kind of throw our weight behind things and voice. We get a lot of folks here that are voters. I think that might be something to explore. That's a good flag. So that's part of the reason I'm here, like exploring what works best for folks. And also, I will say the town of Boone has historically funded the Board of Elections more than we're legally required to ensure that voting sites are open longer hours at more locations in town of Boone elections. So we do have a good relationship there, and it's something we keep exploring. About the carbon neutrality of the municipal operations, we actually hit our 2030 goal in 2023 or 2022, and so we're 8 years ahead. We've got 2040 next.
To a place where you can grow.
A place to be heard.
And take a closer look.
A place where you can crush it.
And push yourself.
A place to find your voice.
This place rocks. And rolls.
A place where you can get out.
Wow! A place you'll never forget.
So where is this place? Let me show you.
Welcome to Boone, North Carolina. Located along the Blue Ridge Parkway, nestled in the Appalachian Mountains, there is no place like it. Take a stroll down charming King Street, where you are sure to see a familiar face welcoming you. In the summer, go tubing down the New River, where the water runs almost as deep as our mountaineer pride. When the leaves change in the fall, pack a picnic and head to Thunder Hill Overlook, where the skyline is so vibrant you can't help but send a picture to all of your family and friends. In the winter, check out one of our nearby ski resorts, where Yosef might just challenge you to a race down the slopes. And year-round, you can take in some of the most breathtaking views wherever you turn. As soon as you arrive in Boone, you'll realize There is something special in these mountains. Welcome home, and welcome to the valley.
A law that reallocated the way we distribute sales tax. So 70%, it's essentially based now on property value instead of population. So before Boone got a lot of the sales tax that was generated. Now it's based on property value. What towns in the county have really high property values? Seven Devils, Blowing Rock, Beach Mountain, resort towns with mainly second homeowners, right? So I see it as an equity issue. This equals out to $4 million a year that the town of Boone loses because of the sales tax here. Now, I'm on Boontown Council. I'm not going to pretend I'm not biased, y'all, right? Like, obviously, I want $4 million for my people. But when I do think of those other communities, if you're out in the county and you need services, where do you go? Boone, right? And so it makes sense for the county to have this tax system that benefits Boone, right? Like, I'm not trying to say that we, like, totally make Blowing Rock destitute or Beach Mountain. I want a fair deal. But right now, I think this is anything but. So that's been a big issue. We're working better with the county now. I will say I'm not the mayor, but I've tried to improve relations. I think, you know, my organizing work in my day job. So my day job, I work for the Endangered Species Coalition, and I organize nationally on trying to keep the Endangered Species Act into law. And that is a data-driven act, right? That law works, and it's also the second most attacked piece of legislation in Congress. So there's a relationship. Like, I think you're right. Data doesn't always work. I think a lot of it really is values-driven. It's how do you highlight the personal stories of constituents, of people in their district? How do you have these really kind of like the personal stake? I think that to me has always been the challenge of moving a politician. When we were working on Medicaid expansion here in North Carolina, when I was with Down Home as a job, right? One of the people in Watauga County actually had her story read on the floor of the North Carolina Senate by a Republican who for the past 10 years had voted against Medicaid expansion. And he said this person came to me and talked about how their mom had cancer, they were struggling, and this is why I'm voting for Medicaid expansion. Now, we were paying for it, right? Like the taxes, every North Carolinian was paying taxes towards Medicaid that 600,000 North Carolinians couldn't access that needed health care. And so I don't really know what data point you have other than the fact we're paying for healthcare and not giving it to people that are struggling, right? And people are still like, nah, it's not worth it. You know, free healthcare, that's communism, whatever the case, all that the stupid arguments. And I think that's the heart of it, right? Is it's like, here's this dude that voted for 10 years, and what changed? Somebody from district that he represents coming in and saying, there's a personal stake. And I think that's always going to trump data. And I think that's oftentimes why, go ahead, come on in, sorry. Welcome. We're having a town hall. And I think that's kind of the issue, right? And I think that's oftentimes why we've seen this alt-right takeover in D.C. is because they don't have any data, right? It's all values-driven. It's all vibes for them, right? And it's been really successful at connecting with working people, at mobilizing working people. And it's not because they're coming out and going, oh, we have all the data, we're right. It's because they're coming out and just like, with this vibe and this personal story and this demonization of people, and that's what we're responding to. And I'm not saying we demonize people, but I'm saying we as the left, whether you're a Democrat or a progressive or like a full-out leftist, whatever the case is, right? If you're left of center, we really need to have some introspection on, well, we've got the data and we keep getting our tails left, right? So how are we going to win beyond that? And I think it's values, I think it's personal stories.
Thank you for tuning in to this special episode of Elevated Politics. Follow our show every other Monday at 5:30 here on App TV.